Mark Bennett had always valued quiet mornings. He loved the soft hum of the coffee machine, the low creak of the kitchen floorboards, and the gentle way sunlight slipped through the curtains like a whispered greeting. But this morning felt different, heavy, almost crowded despite the stillness. He couldn't explain it. Nothing in the house had changed. The same framed photos lined the hallway, filled with familiar smiles. The same soft gray couch sat in the living room, shaped perfectly to fit the lives of two people who had shared years together. Everything in his house still felt like home. But Mark felt a subtle shift inside himself, something he couldn't yet name. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't fear. It was something quieter, like the sense that a story was unfolding somewhere, just out of sight. Mark brushed the thought away and headed toward the coffee machine. He was a man who valued routines. They kept him grounded, steady, predictable. His life, for the most part, reflected that. He woke early, worked hard as a project coordinator for a local construction company, came home by 6 and shared dinner with his wife, Emily. They enjoyed quiet evenings reading, cooking together, planning little weekend getaways they often postponed but still loved dreaming about. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was full of love, full of respect, full of the kind of small moments people often overlook until they're gone. Yet even as Mark poured his morning coffee, he felt that strange heaviness again, like a memory brushing too close. He had no idea that by the end of the day, he would find something that would shake the foundation of everything he believed about his marriage. But for now, he simply sipped his coffee and tried to ease the tightness in his chest. A glimpse into Mark's world. Mark was the kind of man people described as steady, dependable, patient, quietly thoughtful. Not someone who needed the spotlight. Not someone who chased chaos. He had grown up in a small town where people left their doors unlocked, and where everyone knew the birthdays of their neighbors' children. His upbringing shaped him deeply. He believed in honesty, loyalty, and the idea that families are built on shared truths. It was probably why he fell in love with Emily so quickly. Emily had entered his life like sunlight breaking through clouds. She was gentle and warm, someone who listened with her full heart, someone who made the world feel a little softer simply by being in it. Her laugh, soft, warm, almost musical, was the sound Mark cherished most. She made ordinary days feel meaningful, and Mark always believed he made her feel safe. He trusted her completely, or at least he thought he did. A life filled with quiet longing despite having a strong marriage. Mark carried a quiet longing in the back of his mind, a desire he rarely acknowledged. It wasn't for excitement or adventure. It wasn't for wealth or recognition. His longing was simpler, deeper. He wanted to understand everything about the woman he married. Every dream, every fear, every part of her that still lived behind her thoughtful eyes. Emily was loving, present, and kind. But she was also private. Not distant, never that, but careful. She held certain stories close to her heart, not out of mistrust, but out of habit. Mark had always assumed she would open those pages in time. Marriage was long. Life was long. People shared their histories when they felt ready. He never pushed her. He trusted her silence. But as he stood in the kitchen that morning waiting for the toast to pop up, he felt something he couldn't quite explain, like a whisper from a memory he didn't know he had. Something in the house felt different. He tried to shake the feeling off, telling himself it was nothing more than a passing mood. Everyone has strange mornings sometimes. Everyone wakes up feeling slightly unanchored for no clear reason. Still, a part of him, a small, quiet part, felt like something was pressing gently against his life, waiting to be noticed. The spark of curiosity when Emily walked into the kitchen a few minutes later, wrapped in her soft blue robe, smiling the tired morning smile he always loved. Mark tried to focus on her warmth. "Good morning," she whispered, leaning her head briefly against his shoulder. "Morning," he murmured. Squeezing her hand, she looked peaceful, almost glowing in the morning light. Nothing about her expression hinted at anything unusual. She moved around the kitchen in her usual graceful way, humming softly as she reached for the cereal box. Everything was normal, and yet That feeling didn't go away. It hovered like a quiet question at the edge of Mark's thoughts. Something was coming. He didn't know what. He didn't know when. But he felt it, and the strange part was, he wasn't afraid. He was curious. Curious in a way that made his heart beat slow, not from worry, but from the sense that life was preparing to reveal something important. He had no idea that later that day, while tidying the closet, he would find a letter that wasn't addressed to him. A letter written in Emily's handwriting. A letter she had hidden for years. But for now, Mark only knew one thing. Change was moving toward him. Quiet but certain. Like a tide slowly reaching the shore. And he was finally ready to notice the strange heaviness. Mark felt that morning followed him as he walked to his car. But it softened when he glanced back at the house. Through the front window, he saw Emily tying her hair into a loose bun, humming to herself as she watered the small plant collection she adored. The sight stirred something gentle inside him, a reminder of why he fell in love with her in the first place, and like a door silently opening in his mind, memories he had tucked away began to return. The day everything began, Mark met Emily on a rainy afternoon 8 years earlier. He remembered the exact moment it happened, not because it was dramatic or loud, but because it was so quietly impactful. It stayed with him ever since. He had been standing under the awning outside a bookstore, waiting for the rain to ease. People hurried past, umbrellas bending in the wind. Cars splashed through puddles. The world felt rushed, impatient. Then Emily appeared beside him, completely soaked despite holding an umbrella that had flipped itself inside out. She laughed, not the nervous kind, but a warm, self-aware laugh that made the air feel lighter. "Well, that went well," she said, shaking water from her sleeves. Mark had looked at her, surprised by how quickly her presence shifted the mood around them. She had a way of making even the rain feel softer somehow. He offered her his dry umbrella. She accepted with a smile that changed something in him later. They would joke about that day, how a broken umbrella and a patch of bad weather had pushed their lives together. But in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. Not attraction alone, not fate, something deeper. A kind of recognition, as if they had been moving toward each other long before they ever met. The first long conversation, Mark smiled at the memory as he drove to work, hearing the echo of Emily's early laughter in his mind. They talked for almost an hour, that first day long after the rain had stopped. They stayed under the bookstore awning, exchanging stories about childhood, favorite books, awkward moments, future plans. Mark noticed how Emily listened with her full attention, her eyes soft and present. She wasn't someone who pretended to care. She cared fully, honestly. But he also noticed something else. Even then, how she chose her words with careful thought. As though there were stories she wasn't ready to share yet. Not secrets, not lies, just doors she kept gently closed. Mark didn't push. He never would. Instead, he found himself drawn to her kindness, the ease of their conversation, the way she looked at the world as if searching for something worth holding on to. When they eventually exchanged numbers, Mark left with a rare feeling, a hopeful one he hadn't experienced in years. Why they connected over the next few months? Their connection grew effortlessly. There was no rush, no pressure, no dramatic declarations. Just a steady unfolding of two people learning each other's hearts. Mark loved the quiet moments with her, their long walks through the park at dusk, the way she paused before answering, as if giving emotions the space they deserved, the subtle humor she hid behind thoughtful eyes, the comfortable silence that didn't feel like silence at Albert. He also sensed the invisible line in her life, something she kept tucked away. Not out of distance, but out of old pain she hadn't learned to unhold yet. He never asked about it. He believed trust was something that should never be rushed, and Emily, in return, treated Mark with a tenderness that made him feel understood in a way he hadn't felt since childhood. She knew when he needed quiet. She noticed when he was overwhelmed. She saw him not the version he showed others, but the version he thought no one paid attention to. Their love grew from that simple truth, not intensity, not perfection, just two people choosing each other gently, the distance they never named still, even in those early years. There were moments when Emily drifted slightly soft pauses, where her eyes seemed to look inward, as if searching for a memory she didn't want to touch. Sometimes, when Mark shared stories from his past, she would smile with genuine warmth, yet offer very little about her own. Not because she didn't want to, but because something held her back. Mark understood. Everyone has a chapter they keep folded away. He assumed that one day she would share hers, when she felt ready, and whenever her voice quieted, whenever she turned thoughtful and distant for a heartbeat too long. Mark would offer her a gentle smile, the kind that said, "You are safe. I'm here. Take your time." Emily always smiled back, grateful in a way she never put into words. Looking back now, Mark realized, the day moved forward in its usual rhythm. Mark handled phone calls, reviewed project updates, and walked the construction site with his clipboard in hand. Everything around him looked normal: workers hammering, machinery beeping, conversations rising and fading like background music. But Mark couldn't shake the weight in his chest. It wasn't anxiety, not entirely. It felt more like the hush before a storm he didn't fear, but one he sensed would change the landscape of his life. All morning, he thought about Emily, not out of worry, but out of longing. He felt an overwhelming desire to understand her more deeply, to reach into parts of her heart she kept hidden without even meaning to. He didn't know why these thoughts were suddenly so strong. They weren't unpleasant. They came with warmth and nostalgia, as if reminding him of something he already knew but had forgotten to feel by lunchtime. The unease had transformed into something sharper: curiosity mixed with a quiet ache. A small shift that didn't feel small when Mark returned home earlier than usual that afternoon. Something rare for him. He wasn't sure what he was expecting. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. The house was warm and softly lit, filled with the faint scent of apple-scented candles Emily loved. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like a room holding its breath. He found Emily in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the rug, sorting through old boxes of decorations. She jumped slightly when she saw him. "You're home early," she said with a gentle smile, though her eyes flickered with something he couldn't quite read. "Yeah," Mark replied, setting his keys in the bowl near the door. "Work wrapped sooner than expected." Emily offered a soft nod, her hands pausing on a stack of old greeting cards. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Something in the room felt different, not strained, but charged, like an invisible thread tugging between them. Mark walked over and knelt beside her, picking up a faded ribbon from one of the boxes. "What are you organizing?" he asked lightly. "Just things we haven't looked at in a while." She hesitated. "I thought maybe it was time." Her tone wasn't sad, but reflective, almost fragile. Mark's heart tugged. He reached over and placed his hand gently on hers, offering quiet reassurance. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something unspoken, but unmistakably real. A moment of unexpected tenderness. Emily suddenly looked younger in her vulnerability, as if the person she had been years ago flickered through her expression. The shift stirred memories, and Mark walking beside her in the park on crisp autumn evenings, hearing her laugh echo over falling leaves, feeling her hand slip into his with shy certainty. He realized, with sudden clarity, how deeply he still felt those early emotions, how they had never faded, just settled into quieter corners of his heart. "Emily," he said softly, "is everything okay?" She opened her mouth as if to answer, then closed it. Her gaze dropped to the floor, then back to him. She gave a small, hesitant smile. "Some days," she whispered, "the past just feels a little closer." Mark felt those words like a ripple in calm water. Not threatening, not ominous, just meaningful. Before he could speak again, Emily reached for an old photo album at the bottom of a box. Mark recognized it was the one with their early pictures, the ones from their first year together. But when she opened the cover, a loose photograph slipped out. It wasn't of them. It was a picture of Emily standing beside a boy around her age, both smiling at the camera. The edges were worn, the colors fading. Mark's breath caught. He had never seen the photo before. Emily froze as the picture landed face up on the rug. Her expression turned unreadable, almost wistful. "That was someone I knew a long time ago," she said quietly. The same heaviness from his morning returned, settling gently between them. The shift in their connection, Mark didn't ask questions, not yet. Instead, he picked up the photograph delicately, handling it the way one holds a memory that doesn't quite belong to them. "You look happy," he said, offering a soft smile. Emily nodded, her eyes distant but warm. "It was a safe time," she murmured. "A time before I understood what it meant to lose people." There it was, gentle but clear. A crack in the wall she had built around her old life. Mark felt an ache behind his ribs. Not jealousy, not fear. Just the pure longing of someone who wished he could have been there for her sooner. "Emily," he said softly, "you don't have to hide your past from me." She looked up sharply, not with anger, but with emotion. "I'm not hiding it," she whispered. "I just don't always know how to hold it." The honesty in her voice struck him deeply. It pulled them closer in a way that felt like rediscovering each other. Before he could respond, a soft thud echoed from the hallway, like something falling inside the closet. Emily stood to check, brushing dust from her hands. Mark followed her dot, and when they opened the closet door together, something shifted permanently. A box on the top shelf had tipped over, spilling scarves, old notebooks, and an envelope. A single old envelope Mark had never seen. Emily froze. The air between them tightened, not with anger, but with gravity. The envelope lay on the floor like a small piece of fate, one that had waited quietly for years. Mark reached for it, and the world around them seemed to exhale, as if the moment it had been waiting for had finally arrived. The envelope lay between them like a fragile piece of history neither had intended to wake. Mark held it gently, his fingers brushing the worn edges. Emily stood a few steps back, her hands clasped together as though she were bracing herself against a wind he could not feel. He looked up at her, searching her face for answers she wasn't ready to give. "Emily," he said softly, "is this something I should know about?" Her eyes flickered fear, sadness, and something deeper, something almost tender, all woven together. She didn't step forward. She didn't reach for the envelope. Instead, she lowered her gaze, as though afraid of what he might see written across her expression. "I never meant for you to find it," she whispered. The words weren't cold. They weren't defensive. They trembled as if spoken through years of unexpressed feelings. Mark's heart ached not from betrayal, but from the quiet pain in her voice. "Why?" he asked gently. "Why hide it?" Emily swallowed, her breath shaking slightly. "Because I didn't know how to explain something I never fully understood myself." The weight of silence. Mark stepped back, giving her space, not out of distance, but out of respect. He didn't want to corner her. He didn't want this moment wrapped in fear. He wanted her truth to rest gently, not forcefully. Emily finally sat on the edge of the bed, her shoulders softening as though her strength was finally letting her rest. "I've carried pieces of my past quietly for so long," she said. "Not because I don't trust you, but because some memories don't know how to be spoken without changing everything." Okay. Her voice was steady, but it carried years of unspoken emotion. Mark sat beside her, not touching, not pressing, just close enough that she could feel his presence if she needed it. "Then talk to me," he murmured. "Only what you're ready to say." She looked at him, and the sadness in her eyes wasn't directed at him. It was directed inward, toward the version of herself who had once stood at the crossroads of hope and loss. "You remember how we first met?" she asked quietly. Mark nodded. In the rain, under the bookstore awning, Emily smiled faintly, the kind of smile shaped by bitter-sweet memory. "That day, I wasn't supposed to be at the bookstore. I had planned to meet someone." Her fingers twisted lightly in her lap. "Someone who never showed up." Mark didn't speak. He simply listened. He was a close friend, she continued. Someone I thought would always be part of my life. But we drifted apart. Slowly, then suddenly. And one day he left town without saying goodbye. Her voice softened. And weeks later, that envelope arrived. The hesitation between them, Mark turned the envelope over in his hands, feeling the weight of the years it had spent hidden. There was no anger in him, only the quiet ache of wishing she hadn't carried this alone. "Why didn't you open it?" he asked. Emily's answer came almost immediately. "Because I was afraid of what it would make me feel," she said. "Afraid it would pull me backward when I was finally learning how to move forward." She looked up at him, eyes shining with a truth she had never spoken aloud. "You were the first person who made me feel safe again. Not because you replaced anything, but because you understood me in a way I didn't know I needed." Mark felt the impact of her words settle deep within him. There was longing in her tone, not for the past, but for peace. Peace she had never allowed herself to fully embrace. "I didn't want anything from before to change how you saw me," she added quietly. "Emily," Mark said, voice soft and steady, "nothing in your past could make me love you less." The words weren't dramatic. They were honest, spoken with the quiet conviction of someone who meant every syllable. Emily looked away for a moment, blinking back the sheen of emotion. "I know," she whispered, "but I guess I didn't know how to trust myself with that truth." Longing that never found words, long silence settled between them, not cold, not distant. It was the kind of silence that comes when two hearts recognize something tender and fragile between them. Mark felt his chest tighten with a deep, aching empathy. He wanted to reach for her, to offer the comfort she had always offered him. But he didn't. He let her lead. Emily finally exhaled, a trembling breath that seemed to release years of heaviness. "I always hoped I'd be brave enough to tell you everything one day," she said softly. "Be." The air inside the small cafe felt heavier than usual, as though every unspoken word between Daniel and Emily had gathered in the corners and refused to leave. Outside, the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the street, but inside, time felt suspended. People came and went, ordering coffee, laughing softly, going about their lives, but at Daniel and Emily's table, everything stood still. Daniel sat across from her, fingers wrapped around a cup he hadn't touched. Emily, usually composed, kept smoothing the edge of a napkin as if trying to steady her own nerves. Neither of them had said much since she walked in. They both knew this wasn't a casual meeting. Something had shifted too far. Silence couldn't hold it anymore. Emily finally broke the quiet with a small breath. "It feels strange sitting here with you," she said softly. "Familiar, but different." Daniel nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. It's like we're both remembering the same things, but pretending we're not." Her eyes lifted, meeting his for a second longer than she intended. That single moment, one look, held the weight of years. Years of missed chances, half-finished sentences, and feelings tucked away in careful corners of the heart. When she looked away again, Daniel felt something inside him tighten. He had spent so long hiding his feelings that the habit had become second nature. But today, this moment felt like the line he could no longer tiptoe around. "Emily," he said suddenly, surprising even himself, "there's something I need to say." She paused, her hand freezing mid-motion over the napkin. Her eyes softened, but fear flickered beneath the surface, fear of what he might say. Fear of what she already knew. "Daniel," she whispered, maybe I already know." But the words that needed saying were too big, too heavy, too overdue to be left to assumption. "No," he said gently, shaking his head. "You deserve to hear it, and I need to say it for myself too." Emily didn't interrupt. She simply waited. And that, more than anything, gave him the courage to continue. "I never told you," Danielle began, voice low and steady, "but you've been the one constant in my life for longer than I want to admit. I tried to move on. I tried to pretend that the connection between us was just friendship. But it never was. Not for me. Emily's breath caught, but she stayed silent. You were there in every season, he continued. In memories, in moments, even in the quiet times when I didn't want to feel anything. You always found your way into my thoughts. And every time we drifted apart, I told myself it was for the best. But it never felt right. It never stopped hurting. His honesty filled the small space between them like a rising tide. Emily blinked rapidly. Not from shock, she had sensed this truth for years, but from the emotion of finally hearing it spoken out loud. Daniel. Her voice trembled. He held up a hand gently. Let me finish, please. She nodded. I watched you walk away again and again, he said. Not because you wanted to hurt me, but because life kept putting us in different places, different circumstances. And every time you left, I thought, this is it. This is where I let her go, but I never could. A faint, shaky smile touched Emily's lips, sad, tender, aching. You make it sound like I was never hurting too. Daniel's eyes softened. Were you? Emily looked down at her hands, fingers curling into her palms as she searched for courage. The turning point wasn't his alone, belonged to both of them, when we drifted apart. She said quietly, I told myself to forget you, to move on, to stop hoping for something that never seemed to happen. But every time you came back into my life, it felt like breathing again. And every time you left, her voice thinned. It felt like losing something I never really had the right to claim. Daniel leaned slightly forward, not touching her, not crossing any lines, but closing the emotional distance that had stretched between them for far too long. You had every right, he said gently. Emily's eyes glistened. Then why didn't you ever say anything? Because I thought you deserved someone braver. Someone who didn't wait for the perfect moment. Someone who didn't hide behind fear. She let out a soft, trembling laugh, half sad, half relieved. Daniel, I wasn't brave either. They fell silent again. But this silence was different. It wasn't filled with holding back. It was filled with understanding, two people finally reaching toward the same truth without turning away. Emily. Daniel whispered, I'm telling you now because I can't pretend anymore. Not after everything. Not after seeing you again and realizing nothing has changed. Not the way I see you. Not the way I feel. Her tears finally broke free. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming, but soft and genuine, Daniel, she said. Voice thick with emotion. You're not the only one who couldn't move. On the words landed between them like the final piece of a puzzle falling into place. The turning point had arrived. Not with grand gestures. Not with perfect timing, but with honesty, simple, overdue. Undeniable honesty, and for the first time in years, they both felt the weight inside their hearts begin to lift. The sun had dipped lower by the time Daniel and Emily stepped out of the cafe. A warm orange glow stretched across the quiet street, and for a moment, neither of them moved. They simply stood there, breathing the same cool air, letting the weight of everything they had finally said settle into the space between them. Daniel shoved his hands into his pockets, not out of discomfort, but to keep them steady. Emily wrapped her arms lightly around herself, not from the cold, but from the tenderness of the moment. They had both opened their hearts, exposed the truths they had hidden for years, and now came the part that scared them both. The what now? Do you want to walk for a bit? Daniel asked softly. Emily nodded, and together they began strolling down the familiar sidewalk. It felt strange and comforting at the same time, like stepping back into a memory that had never fully faded. Cars passed occasionally. Leaves rustled overhead. They walked side by side, close but not touching, letting the quiet hold them gently instead of suffocating them as it once had. Finally, Emily spoke. I didn't expect today to happen like this. Daniel smiled, a small, honest smile. Neither did I, but maybe it was time. She looked down at the ground, her steps slow and thoughtful. I always thought, if we ever talked about this, it would be messy, complicated, maybe even painful. Was it? He asked. She shook her head. No, it was. Honest. And that's something we never gave ourselves before. Daniel nodded. We were too afraid of losing each other. Emily glanced at him. Do you still think we might? He paused at that, taking a breath before answering. I think. The only thing that can make us lose each other is pretending again. And I don't want to do that anymore. Her eyes softened, warmed. Neither do I. They continued walking until they reached the small park near the end of the block. The benches were empty, and the fountain in the center trickled peacefully, catching the last bits of light from the sky. Emily slowed down near the fountain, tracing her fingers lightly over the cool stone edge. It's funny, she said quietly, how life kept pulling us apart. But somehow we always found our way back to this. To us, Daniel added gently. Emily's breath hitched just slightly at the word. Not because it frightened her, but because it felt right, like a truth she had always known but never allowed herself to acknowledge. He joined her by the fountain, standing close enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. Not pressing, not pushing, just there. Solid, steady. Emily, he began, I know we can't rewrite the past, and I don't know what the future looks like. But I want to try. I want to see where this honesty leads. She looked up, her eyes reflecting the soft shimmer of the fountain's water. So do I. For a moment, the world seemed to still. The breeze quieted. The distant sounds softened, and it felt as though everything around them had stepped aside to make space for this fragile, hopeful beginning. Emily sat down on the bench, and Daniel joined her. The fading light wrapped around them gently, and the air smelled faintly of blooming flowers from the nearby garden. She rested her hands together, thumbs brushing nervously, while Daniel leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. I don't want to rush anything, she said softly. I don't want to make decisions out of emotion alone. Neither do I. He turned to her. We take it slow. We do this thoughtfully, but we do it honestly. She let out a soft exhale of breath she had been holding for years, you know? She said, I used to imagine moments like this. Not the details, not the setting, just the feeling of being understood, of being seen. Daniel's gaze deepened. You've always been seen, Emily. You just never knew it. Her eyes glimmered, and though she didn't cry, the emotion sat softly on her expression, like dew clinging to morning grass. Daniel, what if we get it wrong? She whispered. What if we get it right? He replied gently. She smiled, a fragile, beautiful smile that grew slowly but surely. Maybe we will. The sky above them shifted from orange to a cool, calming blue. Streetlights flickered on, casting a soft glow over the park. People walked by in the distance, chatting quietly, living their own stories. But Daniel and Emily stayed where they were, letting the silence between them become something new, something comforting, something strengthening. Finally, Emily stood. Daniel followed a second later. I'm glad we talked. She said, I'm glad we've finally told the truth. He replied. She brushed her hair behind her ear, an old habit he remembered well. So, we try. He nodded. We try. There were no fireworks, no dramatic confessions, no grand gestures. Rue,